Dispatchers help callers on the worst days of their lives. For over 25 years, we've been there. A silent partner in millions of calls thanks to our redundant and diverse networks that ensure call delivery. Today, cities are bigger, traffic more congested, and the challenge is more complex. But you're never alone, because InDigital is quietly improving, implementing, and driving the next generation of 911, so you're supported in every situation. Make the switch at indigital.net.
Have you ever met a 911 professional and asked, what's the worst call you've ever taken? Well, here's your answer. I heard your last breath the night you flipped your four-wheeler. I tried to call you the day you committed suicide by driving your car into a tree. Blue face, cold to the touch. I helped you with CPR after you found your infant face down, not breathing. It messed me up. I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough. You were with me from the beginning, Grandma. 27 years later, I took the 911 call when you died. How fitting to be there for me in the beginning, and I was there for you in the end. I miss you, Grandma. I am 911. This is but a glimpse into the world of emergency dispatch. But what is it really like to answer a call during someone's nightmare? What is the impact on the first responder answering the call? Available on Amazon or where you purchase your favorite books and ebooks. Imagine listening. Your worst day is our everyday.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
So when I first, I would say in the academy, and then when I first started, they said, you're going to see some shit and you just got to compartmentalize it. And I was like, cool, this sounds magical. I will just, keep work at work, home at home. And, I'll just put I didn't have any awareness of what trauma was, but I'll just put all that junk in my left leg, just compartmentalize it, just put it somewhere, right?
Right.
Put it in a box in your brain. I don't know. And, I thought that was how I was supposed to operate. And I didn't realize what was happening until I was out of it, until I was out from under the water. But we are one whole human with one whole human experience. We cannot just leave work at work and home at home, because especially if you're dealing with crazy things at work, you don't go to work to heal them. You don't have time. You have to bring it home and deal with it at some point and process it. And what I experienced was going too hard for too long. And in 2015, I was Officer of the Year until, well, not until, but I was named Officer of the Year. And then by September, I was completely 100% burned out. I had severe depression, suicidal ideation, adrenal fatigue. I was done. My immune system was shot. And I thought that I was the outlier. I thought that I couldn't share what I was experiencing because people would look at me and be like, oh, well, duh, she's a 5'2" female. She can't hack it. And that was that.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, the leader in next-gen core services, and a big shout-out, as always, to subscribers of the podcast. Thank you very, very much, because I would not be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for all of you, but especially all of you who are here watching, listening, and supporting, and sharing. Thank you so very much. It is March 10th, or Mario Day. If you're into video games, apparently it's Mario Day, March 10th, because it's how it's written out. I don't have to whiteboard it for you. But yeah, happy March 10th. A lot of stuff going on. I am just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Ohio teaching out there at Chagrin Valley Dispatch. So much fun, 2 days back to back. But I will say, those back to back days and then recording episodes with folks the following day, if you do a lot of talking, make sure you have some honey to kind of soothe the throat so that you can continue talking. Because when I don't have it, I'm pretty much screwed for the rest of the time. But it has been a lot of fun. We've got conferences, classes, more episodes, tons of content, powerful stories coming up. And I just can't wait for all of you to see and hear everything that's going to be coming up. Now, I'm excited today. Finally, I think it's been about a year or so that I first saw a video of my guest that is going to be on, and it had to do with, and I'm trying to remember now. When I bring her up, maybe we'll talk about it really quick. But it had to do with pouring water into another cup. And I was watching it, and then I started watching other videos, and I thought, I need to have her on the podcast to talk about a lot of this stuff and hear her story and learn more. So, my guest today, and I did not ask her pronunciation of her last name, but her name is AK, and she's a first responder wellness specialist, as well as a speaker, coach, and author. I'm excited to have her on. Hello, hello.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me.
Yes.
My 5-year-old is going to love learning that today is Mario Day. I thank you for that nugget of information. I'm going to be a cool mom today.
There you go. Hey, you are very welcome. I think it was only about a year or two that I saw it, and someone was like, "Happy Mario Day," and I went, "What?" And they said it's
Yeah.
March 10th. I was like, "Oh yeah, MAR 10. Okay, I get it. Yeah." So yeah, and if your kid plays or has a Nintendo Switch or whatever, those games are on sale as well. They're not paying me to say that. I just saw that.
He does. He has a birthday coming up, so that's
Well,
perfect.
there you go. There you go. They're on sale for today. So I'm excited to have you on. And as I was saying in the beginning, uh, I saw you on TikTok. And yeah, I think it was about a year and maybe a year and a half ago. I don't know. It was a while. And I had sent you a message. I was like, I would love to have you on. And you sent me a message back saying, yeah, that would be awesome. And then we both got super busy. And here we are about a year and a half later.
Yeah, life has been a little crazy, but I'm glad we're finally linking up.
Yes, yeah, it's gonna be good. I see you doing awesome things all over social media, and I think you and I are also going to be on this 100th episode extravaganza with After the Tones Drop podcast as well.
Yes, I just recorded with them this morning. So they had to record it in 3 different sessions because there's so many people who were wanting to be on it. So it sounds like we're in pretty good company.
Yes, mine is on the 14th.
Okay.
So that'll that'll be fun to do. I'm excited for that as well. But I want to jump in and
Yeah.
learn more about you. So public safety. We were talking before we got started. You've been in public safety about 15 years now, and let's go back in time to how you even got started in public safety to begin with.
Yeah. Well, I'm no longer in public safety. I just
Mhm.
kind of they just let me hang out there now. Um but no, I started my law enforcement career when I was 19 years old,
Mhm.
doing undercover online investigations. So I was getting my undergrad at Kent State and got the opportunity to do some shadowing. And immediately they were doing like the Chris Hansen style stuff,
Oh,
only
okay.
like legally, not entrapment.
Oh, right.
So
Yes.
um but as soon as I saw what they were doing and how impactful it was, but it was behind the scenes, I was hooked. I was like, what do I got to do? How do I get in? And they're like, well, you got to become a regular police officer. You got to go through the academy. And I'm like, sign me up. And so I couldn't go through the academy that young, so I had to wait until I was 20. I went through the academy when I was 20, um, got signed on with the local sheriff's office, but they said before you actually start, we want you to finish out your degree. So I did that and started in like the courthouse. I don't know why that escaped me for a moment. Started in the courthouse and did some prisoner transports and things like that, and then worked my way up to road patrol, which is where the bulk of my career was.
So you're doing the Chris Hansen type stuff, and I have to ask, because I mean everyone has pretty much seen those episodes and what it is like, and someone coming in. I mean, are you basically doing that where someone comes in, or are you just doing the communication part and they pick up the person later? The only reason I ask is also because at 19, that's kind of mind blowing, even at 19, to be going through stuff like that and thinking, oh, hopefully this person doesn't freak out or something.
Well, so we set it up a little bit different. We set it up a lot
Hmm.
safer than that. I was doing a lot of the um, what they really found me to be valuable for was the controlled phone calls,
Hmm.
because the people that we were talking to online, they were initiating the conversation. They would say, "How old are you? Where are you? Blah blah blah," and then you kind of just respond as if you were a 14-year-old. Um, but they weren't fully convinced until they got you on the phone and could hear a young female voice. Well, I was that, they needed that.
Right.
And so what we would then do is say, um, okay, I live down the street from the Circle K. I'll meet you there. How will I know it's you? We get a description of them, the car, the timing, all of these things. And then once we would see them there, then we would swoop in.
Interesting. So you're doing all of that, and obviously, like you said already, you really got hooked into it and stuff. And so just from there, you end up doing kind of the transport thing, working in the courts,
Hmm.
and you're building yourself up to road patrol. Now, as you're doing all of this, even from 19, which you were doing in the beginning, and then building up, were you doing like ride-alongs, or were you kind of hanging
Oh
out
yeah.
with some of the officers and kind of getting that as well?
Yeah, and what I find is funny, there's been like this big shift, and maybe it's just in my perspective or my knowledge of it, but I every single chance I got, because I did that undercover stuff for a couple of years, I never got paid for any of that. Like I was just volunteering my time, happy and grateful to be learning. And then I signed on as a special deputy before I was actually commissioned. And all of it was volunteer time, doing ride alongs, just again, happy to be there and learning. Something I don't see that very much anymore. And I don't know if it's because of the nature of the job has become so much more dangerous that people are like, I'm not putting that uniform on for free. But that was what we
Right.
did back in the day. Like you were just happy to be there and gaining the experience.
Right, and that's, that goes along with the dedication and everything, like, that's how you really know that someone wants to be there. I was kinda talking about this, the other day about, dispatchers that would come in to do a sit-along, and sometimes they would be there for about 4, sometimes 6 hours, and that's how we knew, like, this person really wants to get into it because and that sometimes there was nothing going on, and people would be like, "Oh, well, I guess that's what it is. It's that easy." We're like, "No, it's not. It's not a true depiction of 911. It goes to hell in here." But if people were staying that long, that's how we knew. So then, for you as well, doing this stuff and not getting paid, you're learn that's experience that you can't put a price on some of that experience that you end up getting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the sole reason why I was there was to actually make a difference. And I was being paid in knowledge,
Mhm.
so
That, like I said, sometimes that stuff is priceless,
mhm.
and especially with the some of the people, if you're with someone who's been there for years and they're just giving you this knowledge, I mean, there might not be anybody else who gets it. Let's just for an example, just scenario wise, that person retires out. All of that knowledge is gone except for what they poured into you, and you were lucky enough to be able to get that. And I dig that. I like that a lot. It's, the exposure and the experience that comes with it. Now, you end up building up and working towards being road patrol.
Mm.
Was there anything that surprised you Was it overwhelming, or were you just like gung ho? Were you just like, let's fucking do this? Let's do this.
Uh, I was all gung ho and let's do this. And then I was like, this is a lot of freaking paperwork. It was like I
Yes.
had all this energy buildup of like,
Yeah.
zooming around town with my buddies, running lights and sirens to calls, which happened. It
Right.
was a pretty decent part of it because we were on afternoon shift. So everything was in progress. And yeah, that was awesome. But then on the back end, it was a lot of paperwork. And I think that was probably what surprised me most. And that was something that the undercover stuff didn't prepare me for because I was not a commissioned officer with them. I was an auxiliary. So I wasn't doing all of that paperwork. They were doing all the paperwork, taking it to court and all of, seeing it through all the prosecution. I didn't see that until I was in it. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is a lot. So,
Oh,
yes.
so you had it was just kind of that veil over your eyes just a little bit in that sense where it's like I'm doing all of this stuff, and it's almost like the people who would be sitting there in dispatch and saying nothing is going on. This seems really easy, but no. Then you see everything else afterwards, and yeah, in that same sense, I remember doing some ride-alongs and us sitting in the parking lot. I'm like, what are we doing now? Like, well, I got to do the paperwork. Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
The
and
paperwork takes longer than the call. Like you're on the
right,
call for
yes.
10 minutes and it's like you have 30 minutes of writing a report on it.
Exactly. Yeah. So you end up going through all of that stuff. You're learning these different things. Do you remember some of those earlier calls for service that you were going on that I don't know, either got the adrenaline going or that you were just like, is this real life? Like, are we really going to this?
Yeah. I there's a lot of them, honestly. Um, but the thoughts that you just said, that is this real life? Am I really going to this? The first one that came to mind was the fastest I ever got my cruiser up to, and I got yelled at for it. But my one of my guys was calling out for a backup that there was a guy in the front yard. He was responding to a disorderly conduct, um, and there was a guy in the front yard with a machete swinging it at him. And I was like, okay. And I'm like all the way across the county. We're 500 square mile county.
Hmm.
And so I hop on the interstate, and I remember this distinctly because his unit number was 127, and I got my cruiser up to 127 miles an hour. My sergeant was behind me and he kept getting further behind me and I was like, I am going to be in so much trouble. But I didn't care. I was like, I have to get to him. Then he
Right.
radios out that the guy's got two machetes, swinging them around. And so I I got there. I think he ended up tasing the guy. I'm not sure. That part I don't remember, but um everything, was under control in a very safe manner. Everything worked out. Everybody was safe, but my sergeant definitely was not happy with me. And I remember this, and it's a bigger metaphor for life. But later on, he said, "You are no good to anybody if you don't even get there." And I was like, "Oh, that's true."
Oh man.
And so he was like, and he's absolutely right. He's like, "You're not gonna be backup for them if you don't even get there because you were driving unsafe." And I now looking back, I'm like, yeah, that's a bigger metaphor for, we can't help anybody if we're not, you know, moving in the way that we need to move to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And so you gave me goosebumps kind of saying that you're right. And that person exactly right for that as well. Um but also thinking about kind of early on, you're going that fast, you're getting there. I can only imagine that in a way you're like, got kind of like tunnel vision. Like of course you're aware of everything else that's going on, but you're just like and you're trying to get there as fast as possible. And like you said, you were thinking, damn, like I'm going to get in trouble for this. However, that's your partner's life. and
Yeah.
you are the backup. You're going there. You're trying to get there, and at that point, it doesn't matter. It's that I can never remember how it goes. It's something to the effect of it's better to, or it's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission.
Yeah.
So it's
Sometimes.
yeah, right, yeah. Sometimes
Sometimes your forgiveness comes in the form of a write up. So it
that is
happens.
true too. Yeah, no, it happens, and it's it's interesting. Like I've not been in that spot, so I cannot speak to it or anything. I have been riding shotgun with officers when we have been going lights and sirens, and I can only imagine what's going on. Like, we're not talking, they're just driving. Also, I learned on my own that I needed to brace myself in the cruiser because no one told me. And so, I mean, we're hauling ass, and I'm like getting thrown to the side as we're going, and got a little bit of car sickness at the same time until I finally held myself. That was the moment that that specific time that that officer chuckled as he's driving and looks at me and he's like, "All right, good. You're in a good spot." I was like, "Geez, yeah, I'm okay." So just that a little bit of adrenaline and that rush going, like I can't imagine how that is 100 times over for you or any other officer that's not just heading to a call, but going to a spot or trying to get to a spot rather where you're trying to help someone where there's someone that's there that has weapons. I mean, at this
Mhm.
point, 2 machetes, and you have no idea what else is going on. And when
Yeah.
that silence is there and nobody else is saying anything, I can't imagine what that is doing to your head as well.
Yeah. It's it's wild because your brain tries to, and I'm sure this is something you could probably relate to as a dispatcher, but um you have just the audio at that point, and so your brain tries to like fill in the rest, like just creates visuals. So I'm expecting like a bloodbath when I get there, right?
Mhm.
And hoping that it's not my partner's. Not that I would hope, wish that on anybody, but
Right.
if it's going to be somebody, I don't want it to be him. And it's a strange thing because when you're running lights and sirens and you get that tunnel vision and you've got the adrenaline dump, there's like a silence that falls over everything, and it's your adrenaline really just takes over, and it there's a weird sense that just makes you feel really alive. And what I have since learned is that that's actually the adrenaline and the cortisol, and it makes you feel really alive, but it takes years off of your life when that's happening. And so, um, it's that weird sense of calm that comes over because you're so focused, but then on the back end, your brain is like coming up with every worst case scenario possible, to try to prepare you. But it's a very weird juxtaposition.
I can definitely relate with that. Yes. When you're taking calls and your one ear is listening to the room and the other ear with the headset is listening to not just the caller, what they're saying, but every other sound in that room, you're exactly right. It's like putting together a puzzle. All of these different pieces, some of them might be right, others might be completely off the wall, but that's what you're thinking because it's like it's worst case scenario. And you're
Yeah.
trying to prepare everyone at that time for whatever is going to be going on. And then sometimes those voices, those sounds, you might hear something similar later and you have a
Hmm.
trigger and you're like, shit, like, and
Hmm.
sometimes you might not even realize what it is at the moment until you take a moment to reflect, and then you remember something that maybe you had buried down for such a long time.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Right. Well,
Ask me how I know.
yeah. Well, and that's why conversations like this are important as well. So you end up getting out there. Everything ends up being fine. Now, I have to ask too because I really didn't get this when I started. So when I started in public safety, it was 2001, and it was in Central Florida. And I mean, my chief and the lieutenant and sergeant and stuff, like, they would mention stuff like, you might end up taking some hard calls, but the words of, like, self-care, resilience, mental health, and wellness, like, none of that was talked about. Like, it wasn't really anything. It was more so like, you're gonna hear some of this stuff. Some of this stuff might be crazy, but you're gonna be okay. Like, you're gonna be able to work through it, but that was it. Like, and there was, like, no resources. So, with this that you were dealing with early on, would you say, or like, if you've ever taken a moment to reflect, like everything that you're doing now, is there a point, like, can you pinpoint where you kind of started, but also did they mention to you as well anything about mental health and wellness, or you might be dealing with stuff like this and we can refer you somewhere, or maybe someone else had a story that they could share with you?
So when I first, so I would say in the academy, and then when I first started, um, they said, you're going to see some shit
Hmm.
and you just got to compartmentalize it. And I was like, cool, this sounds magical. I will just, keep work at work, home at home. And, I'll just put all my, I didn't have any awareness of what trauma was, but I'll just put all
Hmm.
that junk in my left leg, just compartmentalize it, just put it somewhere, right?
Right.
Put it
Yeah.
in a box in your brain. I don't know. And I thought that that was how I was supposed to operate. And I didn't realize what was happening until I was out of it, until I was out from under the water. But we are one whole human with one whole human experience. We cannot just leave work at work and home at home, because, especially if you're dealing with crazy things at work, you don't go to work to heal them. You don't have time. You have to bring it home and deal with it at some point and process it. Um, and what I experienced was um, going too hard for too long. And in 2015, I was Officer of the Year until, um, well, not until, but I was named Officer of the Year.
Hmm.
And then by September, I was completely 100% burned out. I had severe depression, suicidal ideation, um, adrenal fatigue. I was done. My immune system was shot. And I thought that I was the outlier. I thought that um, I couldn't share what I was experiencing because people would look at me and be like, "Oh, well, duh, she's a 5'2" female. She can't hack it." And that was that. Um, that wasn't the case at all. I have since learned that people who I was working right next to were experiencing very similar things, and none of us were talking about it. And so we did not have conversations like that. The door was not opened for that to be even on our radar. I have also since learned that, and this is not a dig on the department, but there was a critical incident stress management team available to us in that county. Um, I did not know that. It's been there for 25 years. I had no idea. And there were many, many times, like the machete thing was just a funny story. There
Hmm.
were so many other times where I could have used a debrief. I could have used somebody saying, like, hey, that's not normal. You should probably let your brain decompress that. You should probably, um, and I now have the pleasure of being on that team, even though I'm not a responder or a clinician. So they just let me hang out, I guess. I like to think I provide some value, but it's it's wild, eh, that there wasn't anything like that, but it's also refreshing that it has become such an important topic that we're really continuing to turn the volume up on.
I, I fully agree because I was kind of the same way. Listening to you say what you were saying, I'm right there with you because it was the same thing with me. It was so I was in Florida where I started out my dispatching career, but then I finished it in the county that I grew up in, and in Southwest Michigan. And when you work where you live or where you grew up, eventually you're going to be talking to people that you know. And for me, like, again, like burnout stage as well, which actually really quick, what I wanted to say is congratulations on that officer of the year part as well. So that's very cool. But
Thank
I
you.
too hit that kind of a burnout stage, and it was around 2007 or so. And for me, and especially with all the speaking and stuff that I do now, kind of reflecting and looking back on it, it was around 2007, and I can only think that it had to do with one of the calls that I took, where when my grandmother passed away, I took that call. And
Oh,
it was really hard for me to, after that, because I had already been struggling with, am I the problem? Like,
right.
nobody wants to look in the mirror and say, "Hey, it might be you." And it wasn't just me. There was, the county politics, low morale, short staffing, as everybody has right now. It was all of that, a combination of that, and then dealing with these hard calls that nobody was talking about as well. And I was the same way. I buried my calls, and I didn't talk about it or anything. I was one of those folks as well that was like, I leave it at work, which is bullshit, because then I come home and I'm distant or whatever. My dispatch ear is still going, and I'm there, but I'm not really there. Or you end up dealing with a call where someone out there in the field, an officer is hurt, or there's a fight that's going on. And for us, what we would do, because we knew everyone's voices, is we would narrow down who it was by listening to the voices.
Mm,
And then we knew it's so and so, damn it. And then, you leave, and then you're trying to figure all of this stuff out. And so in that same sense, I can understand you and relate, um, with a lot of this when people were not talking about things. Is there, and you said there was a SISM team, but you guys didn't have, um, like, any way to get a hold of them, or maybe they just didn't tell you, or how did that even work out?
so, first of all, I'm very sorry that you had to take that call.
Oh,
That is like my heart
thank
is
you.
with you. Um, but I didn't even know what CISM was until I left full-time law enforcement. I had no awareness of it. And that team existed, but we we were never told that such a thing existed.
Mhm.
And I didn't, because didn't have that awareness, I didn't know to look for it. And I think that's why, part of the reason why I'm so big about talking about these things, because I know that even though we talk about it all the time, somewhere in this country, there is a small department that has no awareness that, that this stuff exists. And
Right.
I hear it all the time. People are like, well, there's nothing out there for us. And I'm like, good Lord, I've got this 5, 10 pages of a spreadsheet of resources for you, but they don't have the awareness to even look for it. And so that's
Mhm.
why I try to constantly um, amplify that stuff.
I like that as well, because in the same sense, like towards the end of my dispatching career, probably the last 2.5, 3 years or so, was when I started finding out more. But it was because I started to finally talk about the stuff that I was going through. Others started kind of talking about that as well. I was writing about it. I just basically, I didn't give a shit anymore what people were going to think, if I started talking about certain things. But we didn't have a SISM team.
Mm,
We had like the county's EAP, that they did, that we could get a hold of, right, if we needed something. And we had an officer that passed away, and it wasn't it wasn't on, on duty or anything like that. It was just some medical issue that happened. It was just like that. It was out of nowhere. And we had someone come in for that, and actually a combination of things that had happened that week. And the team that I'm working with, we're sitting there with the counselor, and no dig on the counselor at all. I'm sure he's awesome at what he does, but he doesn't come from public safety. And it was very evident of, like, just kind of like the demeanor, but also, tell us what happened, or tell me what happened. And we start talking, and then the first thing, without any other response, is just like, well, how does that make you feel then? And we were just kind of sitting there, and I was like, "Mm."
Mm.
And I said, "I don't think you're right for us. I don't think." And but
With
and
all
I,
due respect.
yes, yes. But in the cool thing though was that the dude understood because he goes, No, like you're right. I'm probably not, and you guys should seek someone else." So that was cool. And I've talked to a lot of other people who have said that if you're not like when you're seeking help from someone, a therapist or whatever, if they are not the right person for you, make sure to say it. Don't just stay with that person.
Oh,
And
yeah.
go through a couple of the sessions or whatever. But if the person's not right for you, say that and
Yeah.
find someone else. Find someone who is right for you. So there's a lot in it, but that one time, and I'm glad the dude agreed too, because I felt like an asshole. I
Well, and I feel like I mean, they're people too, and so they
right,
can
yeah.
sense if it's not a good fit. But absolutely, like, I hate to say, like, shop around for a therapist, but
Right.
truly, if it's not a good fit, then it defeats the entire purpose because you're not going to be vulnerable. You're not
Mhm.
going to open up. You're not going to get what you need out of it. Um, and to that point, though, we can't expect to, okay, I'm going to try therapy for the first time. We can't expect to find our prince on the first time. Like, you might have to, it's like dating, you're not going to marry your kindergarten crush,
Right.
you might have to go through those initial one or two appointments, two, three, four, maybe even five times to find somebody that fits. And it's not fun,
Mhm.
but it's worth it.
Right.
It's worth it in the end.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so you end up going through all of this stuff. Do you feel like there was a moment throughout your career in law enforcement where whether it was an incident that happened or something that you experienced, whichever, that kind of solidified like, what, I'm in the right spot, at least for that time, that you felt like I'm in the right place, like this is for me? Because like in dispatch, it it takes us probably about 2.5, 3 years is like the sweet spot to be completely comfortable with everything and really dialed in, I guess is what I mean. And sometimes, you end up taking a phone call or something happens where you're like, "I'm in the right place. I'm where I'm supposed to be."
I would say, I mean, I don't know that there was any one thing. I would
Mhm,
say it was a continuation of micro moments that just solidified, like, for me. And part of this is coming from my faith and my discernment on
mhm,
things. Um, and just being able to recognize that, like, this is where God wants me. Um, there was one moment in particular where I don't know if it was necessarily law enforcement based, but it was like, I am like, somebody just dropped me in this spot at this time. And it was actually my reason for getting Officer of the Year. I We were experiencing a blizzard, and they were like, "Don't be a liability, but be visible. Go park somewhere."
right.
So I was like, so I went to my sector, and I was pulling up to the place where I was intending to park, and there were a bunch of cars backed up, and I couldn't see what was going on. And then I realized that there was a car in the ditch, and I'm gonna try to condense the story for time's sake, but
Yeah, no problem.
so I radioed out and pulled up in front of everybody. I didn't even grab a jacket or my coat. I just like jumped out of the car. Car's in the ditch, it's upside down. There's a female in there and she's passed out. Well, of course, there's a car seat in the back, and I can see that it what looked like she tried to get the baby out and collapsed on top of the baby. So now the baby's like, I can't tell if the baby's breathing. I don't know what's going on. Um, Long story short, I ended up crawling in. The opening had been crushed, and I ended up crawling in and like pushing mom up and out with the help of a bystander. Um, and then I got the baby out as well. And what I didn't know until much later was I was the only one, police, fire, EMS, um, that was on duty at that point that would have been small enough to fit through that space, because like I was talking to, the fire department, and um I was the only female on that shift as far as law enforcement goes. So I for sure was supposed to be in that spot at that time to be able to get mom up out of there and get the baby out of there. Um and that was in January of that year. Fast forward to May, I'm taking a report of a burglary, and this woman's talking to me, and she hands me her ID, and I look at it, and I look at her, and I look at it, and I look at her, and I look at it again, and I said, "Were you in a car accident a few months ago?" And she said, "Yeah, why?" And I said, "I'm the one that pulled you out." And she was like, "Oh my God." And she gave me the biggest hug, but like almost tackled me. And of course, my sergeant pulls in right at that time and thinks she's like tackling me.
Oh,
And so
no.
I'm like, "It's okay. It's okay. We're having a moment. It's fine."
Yeah.
But I had no idea what the aftermath of that report was, because the highway patrol came and took the report. And so I was just there to, get her out and get her baby out. But that was one moment that stands out for sure. Um, where it was like I was for sure meant to be there in that moment.
Wow. That is, that is definitely powerful, and I'm a firm believer, and you just said it right here. I'm a firm believer that some of these calls that we either take or go on, depending on what side of, public safety you're on, are meant for us
Mhm.
because of some sort of experience that we've had in our past, or just something that is our reason for being there. Like you said, you were the only female on and the only person who would be able to fit in that moment. And then what are the odds as well that later on, just a few months later, you end up speaking to this person, like full circle, straight up full circle moment.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, the universe maybe knew you needed some of that closure. And
Mhm.
because if this is all building up, also, you had mentioned earlier, it was shortly after you got the, officer of the year that you kind of hit that burnout, right?
Mhm.
So that before that, I mean, I don't know, just kind of piecing it together in my own brain, it just
Yeah.
seems like something that you kind of needed, as well, going through all of that stuff. But damn,
Well,
that
that was
was definitely for you.
yeah, that was 2014. That was probably my worst year,
Mhm.
um, in terms of mental health. And those 5 months, that situation, because I had to go home and change my uniform because the baby, like, I was a mess. We'll just say
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and um, I don't think I took time to process it, but those 5 months, that lived rent free in my brain. It was on loop. And within that amount of time, I had taken plenty of other critical incident calls. I had one that was right up the road from that same road, maybe not even a mile. 15-year-old girl was, she had her permit for 3 days and was pulling up out of their driveway and got hit by a train. And like, and that happened within that window of time too. And
Yeah.
so I just had all these things that were piling on, and maybe just that little bit of closure was enough relief for my brain, that kept me from making some pretty bad decisions.
There is, there's definitely power in that gift of closure.
Mhm.
I've been talking about it a lot lately with folks that, I had taken a call where it had to do with an infant that, it turned out the infant had passed away, had already been, gone for about 3 hours or so. But of course, with
Yeah.
us, we asked the caller, do you feel like they're, beyond help for CPR, or do you want to try? I will help you. We will try. And we went through, and it was messing with my head. Like we went through all of it. And I think what really messed me up too was that they called the detectives out there after I had hung up, and I thought, what the hell happened? What is going on?
Mm.
And of course, I've got young kids as well. So that is, messing with me too. And EMS calls up for the times and numbers, and they wanted to speak to the person who took the call. I talked to them, and they said, we just want you to know that when we got there, they were doing textbook CPR, and there's nothing else that you could have done. You did everything that you could have. And I needed that.
Yeah.
But also, because the detectives were out there, my supervisor, her husband was a sergeant that was on scene, and he asked if I needed anything. And he came up, sat with me in dispatch, and he goes, what do you need from me? And I said, I want to know everything that happened. So he told me everything. There wasn't any foul play or anything. They were just there to make sure there wasn't any foul play. But I didn't know that at the time.
Sure.
So he tells me everything. And to this day, I will tell him, thank you for that gift of closure, because that whole call, that whole thing fucked me up for that time that I was sitting there in dispatch. And then I come home, I give my son a hug, who's now going to be 21 in 2 weeks. He was probably like 4 at the time. And I remember hugging him, but I hugged him tight enough that he goes, ugh. And then I knew I was hugging too tight. But he was like, are you okay? And I was like, dad just had a hard day.
Yeah.
That gift of closure, man, that is something else. And I'm glad that you were able to get that. I'm glad that not just that, but you were able to meet that person and have that full circle moment. Holy shit.
Yeah. She still had, well, and I'm glad that you got the closure on that as well, because it's rare and
Mhm.
it is a gift. Um, but she still had surgery scars on her wrist.
Oh, wow.
She said she was in the ICU for like 11 days or something like that and had to have a bunch of surgeries. And, but I, in that moment, I was focused on the baby because I didn't know, you're not supposed to move them until EMS gets there. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, but I can't tell what's going on with mom, but I can see that that baby's struggling to breathe. And so I'm like, there's signs of life there. Like I
Right.
have to, they had to make a really hard decision, and thank God it worked out. But it's yeah, that was definitely a God wink.
So how much time from then to when you end up leaving law enforcement and kind of transitioning, like how much time was there in between?
So that was January of 14. Um, February of 15 is when they gave me Officer of the Year
Mhm.
for that incident. And September of 15 is when I finally said, it's me or the job. And ultimately, I had to choose me.
And I love hearing the fact that you chose you, because there are a lot of folks who will not choose them. And I think that also goes with what we do in general, in the sense of wanting to help people and help people as much as possible, sometimes at whatever cost. And sometimes that cost is us. And I think a lot of times people aren't aware of that. They don't, again, reasons why conversations like this are important, because people don't choose them. And when they finally do, sometimes it's too late, in the sense that now they have to almost struggle to get back. It's not so much a rock bottom, but maybe a version of it, whether it be health, mental wellness, whichever, and you're trying to come back so that you can help you. I have a lot of dispatch friends who they themselves as well, and this is just within the last few years, who have said, you know, I was one of those people who, I put it in a box and I felt like I didn't bring it home. And I never really talked about it. I never, I always basically buried these calls or whichever. But now I'm retired out of dispatch, and now I'm struggling. and I'm struggling really, really hard and having imposter syndrome because now I feel like I can't reach out to my 911 family because I'm not there. I'm not in it anymore. So I feel like I can't
Mhm.
reach out to them. So they're struggling. And one person I remember speaking to, they said, I had to learn how to feel again.
Yeah, 100%.
Hmm.
Because it becomes so painful and we don't even realize that that's what's happening, right? But it becomes so painful that we numb it and then we just detach from it. But what we're really doing is detaching from ourselves. We're detaching from our humanness and our ability to feel and heal. And so we have to be able to tap back into that. And that is scary as hell. We feel like if we do that, that we're, standing in a bathtub with a 1970s plug outlet and we're going to get zapped if we do that. And yeah, it might hurt, but you're hurting anyway.
Hmm.
So why continue to suffer in silence when you can release that and get rid of it, clear out the debris? And I think that's something that like I really had to reframe leaving because that made me I had a narrative in my brain that I was a failure. And we have to, reconnect with ourselves. But I had to reframe it and say, okay, I chose me, but really I was choosing everybody else because I was recognizing that I was a liability and that I was no good to them if I couldn't even get there. I was no good to them if I couldn't even connect with them and be and show up as the person that I needed to for them. So I had to start showing up for me first. And that is hard because it feels selfish. People will make you think that it's selfish, but it is absolutely vital if you're going to be anything for anybody else.
I feel like that quote came up a lot in your almost kind of a rediscovery of you and working on you, but also working on everything that you do now. Because it's just as you said it, I kind of smiled a little bit like, man, you're right. Like that. It's
Thanks, Sarge.
right. Yeah, those are the things that stick with you. Like when I first started dispatching, and this is just in comparison on some of the things that people say that stick with you. When I first started dispatching, the first day, the chief comes to my house to see if I still want the job. And I said, yes. When do I start? And he goes, you start tonight. And I thought, holy shit. Okay. And this is just a small PD in a small town in Central Florida. I go in and I meet my trainer, who I will just say was very seasoned, slightly crusty, but very cool person. And I he's showing me everything. He takes an 911 call. I'm dialed in watching him do this because I've never seen this before on this end. And when he's done, I literally applaud him. And I said, "Well done." And he's like, "Oh, thanks." And he goes, "You're next." And my like jaw dropped and I was like, "There's got to be more training than this. Are you serious?" And he goes, "This is the only way you're going to learn how to do it,
Mhm.
by doing it." I said, "Okay." And the thing that has stuck with me ever since that time was he told me that you need three things to be able to do this job. You have to have thick skin, you have to have common sense, and you have to be human.
Mhm.
And that has always stuck with me. Like those first two, people could say that's kind of basic, but that third one, like that one has always stuck with me, like really deeply, of the fact that you have to be human. And that's a big piece, especially when you're dealing with people's lives. The fact that they're trusting a voice, but also like on your end, you're going out to these people and you're quickly, trying to build a rapport and help in any way possible, but at the same time staying safe. And that has got to be a mind fuck as well.
That so that very much mirrors something that I recall my academy commander saying. He said, in order to be a good police officer, you need three things: common sense, a sense of humor, and a little compassion. And it very much I mean, it's like spot
Yeah.
on, right? And it's so true. We oftentimes let the job overtake our humanness,
Hmm.
and that's where we get lost. Um, and that's exactly the trajectory that I write in my book. Is I go from, let's control the controllables, focus on the basics and the foundations of your life to get everything in order and bring you through this journey back to your humanness, because that's where the magic is. That's where we live and truly live, um, in tapping into that. So,
I love that. And I want to make this transition now because you end up, as we said, basically choosing you, right? And
mhm,
you're starting to work on things. It sounds like a lot of these things that we've talked about was really pushing you to also now do what you're doing now. You're still helping people. These are people who come from where you come from and helping them work through it. And I've always told people, like, a lot of the stuff that I do, I want to leave 911 in a better place than where I found it. And there are so many more resources now, so many more conversations. People are actually talking about this, and a lot of this stuff really isn't for us. Well, maybe in a way, because I don't know about you, but for me, talking to a lot of people, having people come on the podcast or the teaching that I've done, and the peer support session that I do, that's therapeutic for me as well.
yeah.
Because those things that we've dealt with, that'll always be there.
Mhm.
It's just how you end up managing it through talking, and sharing and stuff. So I feel like in the same way a little bit, it's still therapeutic for you as well. So what is it that you're doing now? Your transition to what it is that you're doing now? Because as I said in the beginning, you're all over the place, and it's awesome to see the stuff that you're doing, whether it be the speaking, the reels, TikToks, and the stuff that you're talking about. These There's a lot that you can say in like a minute and a half or even shorter. Sometimes people don't even understand it, but there's so much that you can put in, and that's how I found you as well.
Yeah, those 90-second zingers were getting people
Right.
on TikTok. Um, but yeah, so in 2015, I left full-time law enforcement, stayed on as a special deputy, and then grabbed an auxiliary position in a different department. But at that point, I became a criminal court victim advocate.
Mhm.
And so I took advantage of having like normal working hours. And I went back and got my master's degree in criminology and victimology, which is where my eyes really got open to trauma and what
Mhm.
that is. And I was like, this is not just for victims. I don't like what's going on.
Right.
So I then I was also on my own healing journey as well. So I was like gathering all this information, and then I started diving back into things like yoga, and I was like, okay, I want to become a yoga instructor. So I did a 10-month yoga teacher training simultaneous to my master's, because I'm a glutton for punishment. And yeah, because basically my nervous system couldn't slow down, because I was also planning a wedding at that same time. And it was just like I didn't know how to slow down.
Mhm.
So in hindsight, I think I had two burnouts, but anyway, so I started diving into my own healing journey and learning how all of this mind, body, physiology, neurobiology, all of these things work, how to control your own physiology as far as stress management and what stress and trauma do to your system. Um, Gathered, I don't even know how many certifications. I went as far as to become a Reiki master, meditation specialist, all of these different things. And then in 2020, I left that position, took a few months off, and then decided I can bring all of this together. And I created Lifesaver Wellness, and I started coaching people. And I created curriculums to do trainings at agencies, which then morphed into speaking at conferences now all across the country. My TikTok, which I started on a whim, took off. And I've been on a ton of podcasts and wrote a book. And so it's just really kind of taken on a life of its own. But I often sit back and go, this is insane. Like, I don't even know what my life is anymore. But then I have to use my own tools and reframe it. And so I've been reframing it instead of saying this is insane, saying this is ordained. And everything that I went, and that what that does for me, I'm going to get emotional, is lets me have the reframe that everything I went through was for a reason. And it was for a very powerful reason, and it's helping other people. So it wasn't all for naught. And so I have to like constantly reframe that for myself because
Right.
it really is, it's all been such an incredible blessing. And um it's wild. It's a wild ride to be on.
This is a phenomenal story. Very powerful. Like everything that you're doing, the things that you've gone through, and yeah, just like you said, it's all been worth it. At the time, you don't know, right? You you don't know anything that's going to happen, and even when you start going through it, when you're making the transition and all of that stuff that's going on, you're still not seeing it. Like everyone else is probably telling you, and I only say this because I've gone through it with some of the teaching and stuff that I've done where people say these things to me. I'm like, okay, like what? Like
Yeah.
I'm just a 911 nerd who had a passion and wanted to help because of the shit that I went through. And so yeah, just like with you, you don't really know until you finally give yourself a moment to reflect.
Mhm.
And I've told people that in the past too, like, a lot of times people will say, I wish I was living this way, or I wish this was my life. Well, you might be moving so fast that you don't realize that you are living the life that you want. You
Yeah.
just got to take a moment to reflect on it. And so you have been like going through this whirlwind of kind of rediscovering yourself, feeling again, but also building on all of these things, no matter how crazy it might sound, with the yoga stuff and all, all at the same time, planning a wedding and everything, but it all comes together.
Mhm.
And now here you are. And I can just imagine that, like, I mean, you kind of said it as well already. You just kind of sit there for a moment. You're like, this is my life.
Yeah. And it really is. And I know that there are some people that are cynical about it, like, "Oh, it must be nice." Well, yeah, it hasn't always been so nice.
Right.
And there's that aspect of it, but then there's also the aspect of that is my job, that is my reality. My day-to-day reality is I still have a kid in diapers. I've got a 5-year-old, an 18-month-old. I've got 2 dogs, one of which is geriatric. So, like, my chaos level is still there, but it looks very different.
Right.
Um, and so my day-to-day life is like as normal can be. But then, I have these moments that smack me in the face where I get an email from somebody that says, you helped me stay out of spiraling into my own darkness. And I'm like, what? And so it's an incredible gift, to know that you can be such an integral part of somebody else's story. But then, I jump right back into like it's bath time, bedtime, and like, and so it's a weird place to be, but I'm here and I'm loving it. So
I love that, and I thank you for everything that you do. Um, it is, like you said, a blessing. And yeah, you're right. There are some cynical people out there who are like, "Oh yeah, this and that." I
yeah.
put out a video recently where I'm like, "Look, this I'm sure this looks glamorous. You see me at conferences doing this and that or eating cool pho or sushi or whatever. However, what you don't see is the fact that I drove 12 and a half hours because I wanted to save money and because I wanted to be able to do, this or that or whatever. I drove, and then I drove all of that back, and what you also don't see is that I leave my family for, like, a week, and I wanna hang out and play with my kids, like, those are things that people don't see, so, yeah, I love what I do, and I wouldn't change it, but there are some things that people don't see where, I mean, it can be a struggle as well. And it's like, damn,
Yeah.
you got to do more reflection, got to do,
Yeah.
this and
Yeah,
that and
and you don't
everything
want to
else.
sound ungrateful, right? Like,
Right.
because there's struggle and there could be struggle in anything, but um yeah, there's it's a different side of things.
Right.
And
It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't. I
no.
mean, just listening to this episode when people hear it, like there's a lot that you went through to
Yeah.
get to where you're at today. So I've got
10
two
years.
things, 10 years of it's not a short time. It
No.
might have maybe felt like it went by fast, or maybe some points where it's like, when is the year going to be over, But
Right.
it all comes in waves is what it is basically. And so as we go into the wrap up of this episode, which has been awesome to have you on here, I know you've got something coming up in about 15 minutes. So I want to make sure you have enough time in between. Um, but honestly, I could talk to you all day. Like this was
Same.
awesome. I had so much fun with you. You just came out with a book, seeing it all over the place, which is really awesome. How can people find the book? What's the name of it? Where can they find it? And also, how can they find you on social media and everything else?
Yeah, so my debut book is Beat the Burnout, Prevention and Recovery Solutions for Frontline Burnout. It is now, just as of yesterday, is a prime item on Amazon.
Oh yeah,
Um, I'm very grateful to say that it has been the number one new release in law enforcement for over a month now. Um,
congratulations.
and thank
Awesome.
you very much. But it should, as of tomorrow, March 11th, not Mario Day,
Yeah.
um, should be available in stores at Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, all kinds of other bookstores. It's available online at those places, just not retail yet. But everything that anybody would need to know is all linked up at akdazani.com. My socials are all linked up there. Most of my handles are just akdazani, with the exception of Facebook, which is Lifesaver Academy with AK Dazani. So pretty easy to find. And yeah, I'd love if people wanted to reach out to me. I'm here for it.
Perfect. Thank you so very much for everything that you do. And I've got one last question for you.
Sure.
So, out of all of this time that you've been in public safety and actually just everything that you've done, if you could go back in time to talk to yourself in the beginning, what would you say to yourself? And this is not to change anything, right? Because I feel like, and I kind of feel like maybe you're the same way in this sense where we go through a lot of things in our lives, whether it be hard lessons, experiences, anything that brings us to where we are at today. So if you could go back in time just to talk to yourself going into this profession, what would you say to yourself?
Don't be afraid to be who you are. I think that is like the number one thing. We take on the identity of the job often, and uh we just try to be what everybody else, and maybe it's not even the job, maybe this is just a human thing, but we try to be what we think everybody else expects from us. And there is so much beauty and value to be found in being authentic and being you. um and we don't often see our own worth, but there were certainly times where I was not who I knew myself to be at my core. And those are obviously moments I'm not proud of. And I don't know that I would change them. But if I had the opportunity to go back and remind myself, it would be, don't be afraid to be who you are.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being on, for everything that you do. And again, I had
Thank
a
you.
great time with you. I will be right back here with you in just one moment. So, for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you ever want to be a guest on the show, you can easily find everything on links.co/WTT podcast. And that's links with two eyes.co/WTT podcast. You'll find everything there: email, social media, where to follow, latest episode, where to listen, where to purchase the Imagine Listening books. Also, if you are new to dispatch, seasoned, or you are retired, you can go on there, hit the link, I would love to share your story. I've been doing this for over a decade now. The podcast is heard in over 60 countries, and I've surpassed 2.3 million downloads. So your story is going to be heard literally around the world, and I would love to share it. So you can find that on there as well. And you can also find podcast and dispatch merch, again, at links with 2eyes.co/WTT podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital, a leader next-gen core services. Shout out to subscribers as always. This can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as X and LinkedIn Live. And you can find clips all over Instagram Reels, as well as Facebook Reels and TikTok. And then you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we will see you all in the next one.
You just listened to a Code 7 Network podcast. If you have any questions or would like to be a guest on the show, send an email to WTTpodcast@gmail.com.